We're gathering around the table today with Dr. Currie Myers, and I love a good conversion story. We were just talking about a convert. I have a friend who's a convert, so we always called him a little baby Catholic. So we got a little baby Catholic on the podcast today, and we're going to be talking about his conversion story and also his time in law enforcement, pro police over here too. So can you start off, share a little bit about your background and tell us where you're from?
Well, I'm from Kansas. I originally was born in, I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, but immediately moved to a little place called Perry, Kansas, which is about 45 minutes due west of Kansas City. And my dad was a civil engineer, and he built most of the federal flood protection lakes in the beginning after the 1951 flood. And so during the late 50s and 60s, he built all the lakes in Kansas and Missouri to mitigate those problems, and chose a final destination as Lake Perry. So I grew up on a 40,000 acre federal project where it was just me and my German Shepherd. And so that's where we ended up spending the vast majority of my youth. And then live now in Mission, Kansas with my wife, and we have 5 children. Most of them have been married or adults, and 11 grandchildren, and hopefully counting, because we've had a couple that aren't done and a couple that aren't married yet. So yeah, so that was all part of the fun. I started my career as a state trooper in Kansas and worked what's called Troop A, Kansas City Metro. Went to the Kansas Bureau of Investigation as a special agent, and then worked undercover. That's back when I had long hair and earring, and rode a Harley, and worked organized crime and biker groups and things like that. Pretty good. I was pretty good at it in all humility. So I kind of like that kind of, I was always, when I was in college, and I've always been a singer. So when I was in college, I was in a select group where we toured around the country and performed for alumni. And it was kind of my full-time gig in college for about 3 years. So got my dab at entertaining people during those days, and working undercover is a little bit of that, entertaining part of the biz. And then after, in the KBI after drugs, I went and worked in the field division where I worked homicides and public corruption, in custody deaths, police shootings, things like that. And then I was very blessed. I ran for Johnson County Sheriff, which is the largest, most populated county in Kansas, in the Kansas City metro area. And I was elected to that position, served 1 term. And it's one of the larger sheriff's offices in the Midwest. And I went back to graduate school while I was still on the job, and got my doctorate in criminal justice, and also got an MBA during that time period. And as soon as I retired, I went and became a defense contractor and focused on the nexus between Mexican drug trafficking organizations and Middle Eastern terrorist organizations, and how they were kind of partnering together, especially in the drug trade and the use of sending people over. This was early on, before any of the kind of hot button stuff that we're seeing today. Then I've been teaching. I'm just retired from teaching, but I ended up teaching for a good 18 years. 14 of those, the last 14 was at Benedictine College as the professional and residents in their criminology department. So had a great career, loved every minute of it, and now it's my time to focus on applied criminology and Catholic apologetics. So that's kind of where we're at today.
Yeah, what a full life already. That's amazing.
Yeah, very blessed.
A lot happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to know really quick, in Chicago, we have deep dish pizza, so Chicago style hot dogs. What's Kansas known for? What kind of food?
Oh, there's no doubt. It's barbecue. I mean,
Love it.
you can't throw a rock without it in a barbecue joint in Kansas City, and all the, any place in Kansas or Missouri, it's pretty much all barbecue. Now, to the aficionado of those that, there's so many different types of barbecue, but I've had some bad, but most of the places are pretty good. Jack Stack in particular is known here in Kansas City, and Q39 is another one that's known, but there's some hole in the walls that actually has some pretty good stuff too. So I got to get my fill of Q every once in a while.
Yeah, sounds so good.
Yeah.
Well, I want to know about your faith growing up and what led you to the Catholic Church, what led you home to the Catholic Church.
Well, I was baptized a Baptist, but I really wasn't, I don't remember it per se. But then when I was young, we went to the Methodist church in the small town that was closest to the lake called Perry, Kansas. And I kind of went there. I really wasn't that engaged. I did sing in the choir a little bit when I was younger with my mom and dad. But, like most kids do, nothing really that made me go, wow, I'm at home. This is the things that I want to do. And then when I got into high school, I started to drift quite a bit. Mom would kind of be the only one to kind of make sure that we're doing things. Dad was a believer, but he was when I say deacon, it doesn't mean deacon like in the Catholic religion, but he was a deacon, which basically meant he was on the board of directors for the Methodist Church. And he told me one time that he was frustrated after a couple of years doing that. And he said, the worst part about religion is the people and, not the religion itself. And I think there was some strain and, financial issues and not behaving correctly and things like that. So he kind of drifted off, especially. And then by the time I got to college, I was gone. I mean, I was, one of Satan's minions, that was doing things that I shouldn't. I was a good kid. I mean, I wasn't doing anything illegal, but I was, I liked girls and I liked drinking too much, especially in college. So, you kind of drift off from anything in particular. And then when I got into law enforcement, I became pretty agnostic, where I believed in God and I believed in Jesus. I just thought religion was kind of, what was the meaning? But I did ask myself, how could God allow these kinds of things to occur that I'm seeing every day? And I saw some bad things. I was in a position, as a state trooper, you're witnessing things, especially in an urban area, but horrible accidents and fatalities. And, I probably arrested close to 200 and 300 felons a year. Just because of the interstate. There's so many people that drive up and down the interstate from all over the country and world that are committing criminal acts, and you see them. But when I started working undercover is when it opened the door to a whole another life. When you're portraying yourself as somebody who you aren't, that makes it more difficult. So I started out single when I was a state trooper, but within a couple of years, I got married to the loveliest woman in the face of the earth, who was a cradle Catholic, and not just a cradle Catholic, but devout. She had a devout family, 10 kids in the family. The baby is a Dominican priest, Father Andrew Hofer, who is a very well-known Catholic theologian, has written many books. But I wasn't there, I wasn't there, and I was really loved my work, and I was gone quite a bit. You just see things that make you wonder whether or not why God is allowing these things to occur, because there was so much despair, so much despondence. And you just felt like in law enforcement, you were just kind of, the faces would change, but it was the same stuff that you would always, get into. I remember working a case once where I did a buy, and as I was in there, I noticed the walls kind of moving, and kind of startled me because I'm focused on what I'm trying to do, but it's out of my peripheral vision. And what it was millions of cockroaches that had infested the walls, and they were moving at that time. And one of the reasons they were moving, that the man and woman who were pretty large drug dealers with respect to supply, they had 3 kids, and the 3 kids were just in horrible condition. After we finished the case, went in and did a search warrant. The bathroom was broken, not fixed. The kids would in the family would defecate. When the stool was full, they didn't fix it, so they would defecate in the bathtub. And then when the bathtub was full, they did it in buckets. When that was full, they'd go to the next bathroom. There was 2, and they were doing the same thing. It was just a whole nother level of absolute, I say whenever I speak, because it's part of my conversion story when I go around and speak, is that I would go home. Sometimes, I'd be gone for a week or 2 weeks, but I would go home and I would drive up to my white picket fence life and, to my wife and family. Sometimes it just didn't jive. It just didn't, because I was, I'd see what I was seeing. And it wasn't until I was working a major case. This person was distributing kilograms of cocaine hydrochloride, which is powdered cocaine. And I had been into them for about 9 months. And that means I'd been working a case with them, doing buys, working up the chain on different qualities and amounts and quantities. And it was coming time for the conclusion of it, where we were going to do a buy bust. I met with them. We agreed on a purchase price, and we agreed on amount. They left to go get it from their source of supply, and it was a man and woman again. who were partners in this. They left and said, I'm going to be right back because it's not here. And when they left me in control of their 4-year-old little boy without even thinking. I mean, I had known these folks for about 9 months, but it's really the first time I really stayed in the house. But they didn't really know who I was. They didn't know what kind of person I was. I mean, thank goodness I was a law enforcement officer. Of course, they didn't know that, but that's kind of the one that kind of broke me a little bit. And we also had a 4-year-old little boy at home at the time. So that, really had an impact. I went home to my wife and I just said, I can't do this anymore. Not law enforcement, but I can't do this. I've got to, I don't look like the person I was. I don't act like the person I was. It's time for me to change. And so the KBI recognized when I went in them and talked to them, and they transferred me and assigned me to field operations where I worked homicides and death investigations and, police shootings and the things that I mentioned before. Now that doesn't, for most people, they'd go, oh, wow, you went from that to working terrible homicides, but at least I could be kind of a typical law enforcement officer again. And I wasn't hiding behind a sobriquet or a persona. Still saw horrible things, but and that didn't make me convert because I was still seeing horrible things, even worse things, quite frankly. But it was a stair step, on kind of my attitude at that time about really not growing in any faith life whatsoever, even though my wife was a devout Catholic. Now, what I didn't say is I had promised when we got married that I would go to church with her because my dad said, Currie, regardless of what you do, you need to be a part of that family when they're going to church. So my promise to her was I went to church just about every weekend unless I was physically gone. And when we had kids, I agreed to raise them Catholic. So I was sitting there in the pews, but most of the time not really paying attention to things.
How many years were you a police officer when you became Catholic? Did that affect your faith life anyway, when you were a Catholic to
Well, I started in
Catholicism
law
and the police
enforcement in
officer?
1980. Yeah, no, a great question. I started in law enforcement in 1985, and I didn't convert until 2000.
Okay.
My wife Bernadette and we got married in 1987. So we're talking about 13 years of me being agnostic in a really what was a devout Catholic family that I went to represent it and be what I thought was a good father by at least being there and supportive of what they were doing. And so it was one of those where over time, I got to the point where you get so despondent yourself on kind of where you're at and what you're going because you're unhappy where you are. And my wife was a stay-at-home mom at the time, so we were really financially strained because it's a law enforcement officer's position. And all of our kids were going to Catholic school, didn't really have much money. I said, I got to do something to earn some sort of income. So I really couldn't work officially. Back then, at least as a special agent, I couldn't have other jobs. I had to do that job officially. But what I did do is I found a place where I could go work for cash. And it was a location that basically had different types of rocks come in, and people could come and buy rocks for decoration in their homes or whatever. And I went there and I palletized rock whenever I was off for, 6 or 7 hours a day, maybe even longer if I was off. And it's really laborious work. I mean, it's tedious and laborious and it's heavy. I did get in good shape during that time period, but it was hard work. And I had forgotten to take a snack with me one of those days, and I was really hungry. And some of the people that I was working with just invited me over to eat, and I didn't speak the language. They were all speaking Spanish, really nice people. But it was funny when they came to eat, the families came to. I mean, all of the family would come. They didn't work there, but all the mothers and children would all come to where the father was at working, and would have lunch together. So, I sat down and had some really good, authentic Mexican food. And as I walked back to my station to continue work, that's when God spoke to me and said, "What are you waiting for? I am here."
Wow. But I'm curious too, because in your bio on CatholicSpeakers.org, where I booked you, it says you
Yeah.
now recognize one of the church's most underutilized evangelizing charisms
Yeah.
is hospitality. Why is that, and how can we bring awareness or make people more aware of this?
Well, the lesson I learned in particular, again, a 13-year period of not converting to the faith, with, being married and longer than that, just me personally, is that for some people, you need help, all in different locations from a religious point of view or where we're at. And this is the reason I think sometimes we might focus a little too much on, from a formation point of view, on structure and maybe not enough on the beauty of the church. And in fact, Cardinal Balthasar, I think is his name, but he's someone who talked about the beauty of the church. In fact, he wrote about it, and John Paul II actually made him a cardinal right before he died as a result of his work on the beauty of the church. And Pope Benedict also referred to him often. And if you look at Bishop Barron, he's even kind of modeled the word on fire he talks a lot about beauty. And I think for me and others, we need to introduce more about the beauty of the church, which is not only the art and the truth of the Catholic Church, but it's also little things like charisms. And God has assigned a charism to each of us, possibly more. And one of those charisms is the charism of hospitality. We may not know what our charism is until we are spoken to about it or find it. But I think the one thing that is so important is that many times we lack hospitality when we interact with people. And my wife was the first person that I ran into that had that form of hospitality with me. Is that I'm not, we all, like any marriage, you have days where you may argue about something and things like that. But from joining the Catholic Church, or why aren't you joining the Catholic Church, or we've been married, you've been sitting there was none of that. It was always a reinforcement, and knowing that I wasn't quite there, she still made things hospitable and made me feel welcomed with where I was at that time and place. And when I joined the church, I went to our parish priest at that time, which was a very good, jovial Catholic Irish priest. And I told him, Father Colin, I'm ready to join the church. And in his typical, he was very humorous, and he said, gosh, Currie, I forgot you weren't Catholic, because I was always sitting in the pew. I never went up to receive the Eucharist, of course, but I was always there. And of course, he was joking in a way, but he also had the charism of hospitality, because instead of poo-pooing me or shooing me away and said, well, okay, go get in line to have school to make sure that you're following RCIA or whatever it's called today. I know
RCA,
it's
yeah.
changed. He said, because I did go through RCIA once and I didn't join. I did promise Bernadette, hey, I think I'm going to go through it. I went through everything until they said, okay, it's time. And I said, I'm not called to do it. So I didn't do it. And he remembered that I had done that a couple of years ago. And he said, Currie, I tell you what, why don't we meet every week and let's spend time together and let's talk about what your concerns are, what kind of problems you have. And of course, by then I didn't really have any concerns, because I mean, if God speaks to you, you answer that call. And I immediately, you start, doing more research on the Catholic faith. And it certainly had helped that I was sitting in those pews at that time and understood some of the things about it. But if it wasn't for his charism of hospitality, by doing that, because he could have very well set me back into line and say, go through school again. And what happened is I met with him for about a month every week for 3.5 or 4 hours. Now, you know how busy priests are. I mean, they're extremely busy men, and they don't have a lot of time, but he set aside that time, and we would sit, and sometimes we'd get together in the evening and have a good scotch or an Irish whiskey and a cigar, and we would talk about things. Sometimes we went to a ball game together and would talk. But I came into the church quietly. I didn't tell my wife, I didn't tell my family. And I came into the church quietly with him and a sponsor. And that's how I came into the church. And it wasn't until the weekend after I came into the church, we went back to visit my folks, and it was my mom at that time, actually. And my dad had since died. Went back to visit my mom, and we went to Mass at the Catholic school across the street from the Methodist school, a Methodist church in which I went to as a child. And I sat on the end of the pew, as I always do, because I'm a cop and I'm trying to be situationally aware to protect everybody. And I usually got up and let Bernadette and the kids would go by for receiving the Eucharist or getting the blessing. But this time I followed her, and my wife has a great sense of humor, but when it came to Catholic issues, she didn't joke around too much. So she saw me in line and goes like, I never went up for a blessing. So, I mean, I'm literally following her up, and she knows that, I mean, people who know me know I'm a practical joker and like to have a little fun, but I wouldn't do that. And so she was a little bit concerned. And then as I'm walking after taking communion, walked around and we sat down, and I said, oh, by the way,
You're Catholic. Was her face just priceless, or what was her reaction?
oh, I think we both were a little,
Mm.
emotional. And I tell this story all the time, but I still get emotional about it.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. That's crazy that you just did it so quietly and didn't tell her until
Yeah.
you're walking up until communion.
Yeah. And the interesting part, so, here's my wife who has this, great spirit when it comes to welcoming and hospitality. I had a priest that experienced that. While I was attending St. Agnes, I had a parish community that would always invite us to stuff. Well, that matters, when you're, on a Friday night, if somebody in the community would invite you over for like a happy hour or something, you'd sit around and talk, and it was always part of the church. The interesting part for me is that beforehand, I had nothing but cop friends, which is a horrible thing if you're in this profession. And what I found over time is I was slowly getting to the point where my cop friends became worker acquaintances and friends and brothers and sisters because I loved them. But the people I hung around later on, even before I converted, was my parish community. And so that hospitality, the fact that people were reaching out to me and say, hey, Currie, come on over. Or, hey, Currie, let's go golfing, or whatever it may be. So that version of hospitality. The really fascinating part is after I told Bernadette, she had indicated to me, and of course the kids were crying as well. 4 of the 5 had been born by then. She had indicated to me that she had been doing alone and with the kids as the kids came into our family, intercession with St. Jude for my conversion.
And he's the patron saint of impossible causes, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an awesome saint too.
I have a great love for St. Jude. So, the charism of hospitality, there are many charisms. What you're doing is a charism, right now with evangelization. I do the same with my podcast and the public speaking that I do, but there's others. There's wisdom, there's teaching. There's so many different charisms. And I usually talk about the importance of charisms whenever I'm speaking to people and go through a litany of different ones. You just because you might do something well doesn't mean it's a charism. You might have a charism that you don't know about, and you have to kind of discover it. And the Catholic Church has the ability to allow you to discover it through different ways that you can, seek what you're looking for. And sometimes I've been a college professor, so one would think that teaching would be my charism. And I score high on the charism list for teaching, but it's not the highest. And it's because maybe maybe it's not really a charism. It's just something I need to do. So, we all have different charisms, but I think all of us should be to try to, even if it's not a charism, we should try to be hospitable in welcoming people into the parish, into the church, because there may be somebody like me somewhere that is just waiting for that invitation, and they may or may not join immediately. But if you say prayers for them, say prayers for people in your parish community or people that are searching, or maybe there's a family member that has fallen away or hasn't joined the church yet. Pray for them and give them hospitality, not lectures, but give them hospitality.
You think hospitality is a version of evangelization? There's a church that's 30 minutes away from me that says, "Be disciples, make disciples." And
Sure.
there's a Bible quote that says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you." Is hospitality a form of evangelization?
I think so, or at least it can be. And if you're, quite frankly and honestly, if you're going to be a good evangelizer, you got to be hospitable in how you interact with people
Mhm.
because it's just part of the, if you yourself were stoic and not real accommodating, and didn't have that, as soon as I came on, you've been welcoming, if you didn't have that, then, it wouldn't be a very fun podcast.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's
Yeah.
true.
So yeah, it takes a certain talent to be able to do what you're doing, and I give you great credit for you because
Thank you.
not everybody can
Yeah,
do it.
for sure. But you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier that you're a podcast host. We're running out of time here, but I wanted to
Yeah.
talk to you really quick about your podcast. You're a Catholic writer, you speak, you're CatholicSpeakers.org. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I started a podcast called the St. Michael's Group Podcast, and really it's dedicated to Catholic apologetics. So I write about different things, and there's no really form to it other than I may feel called about writing something. There's people who ask me on the street about something, and I say, you know what, that's something I need to write about or write more in depth about. There may be issues or problems. I'm writing one this weekend on Balthazar in the beauty section. I did one on our Holy Mother on Monday because it was the beginning of the feast day, or our feast day's coming up, but it was the beginning where you could do a memorare to her. I'm in the middle of doing episodes on the history of the Catholic Church that goes back with the beginning of Christ through, I'm at episode 4, so I'm up to about 1054 AD. And so those are the things that I talk about, but it could be varied. And I think parents could, take a look at it, and sometimes it can help explain things to their kids, but everybody could potentially find value in it. And I also write it down and I source everything. So when you see me write, everything is sourced with the appropriate Catholic background and language, and it's always associated with scripture. Everything that I do is associated with scripture. I have some music on there. I did my Christmas album that's on there. And when I play it, I also talk about um, how it kind of impacts your faith, even if isn't a traditional Christmas album from a religious point of view. I also have another podcast, and I don't want people to get confused, but I have one on it's called America's Criminologist, where I do one on crime and public
Okay.
policy and all those things. And I have a radio show that I do out of San Bernardino that's streamed all over. But I'm really proud of this in particular, and the fact that I'm going around and speaking across the country now. I'm going to be at the St. Augustine Center at the University of Idaho next month. Catholic Answers is having an event out there. I'm going to speak twice. Out there, I'm going out to a parish in Indiana next month for a 3-day retreat. I'm speaking at Legatus, which is a Catholic businessmen's organization. I have that coming up. I did a Eucharistic conference just a few months ago for a diocese. So I'll go anywhere, and I'll especially go to smaller parishes because sometimes smaller parishes can't afford really good
Okay,
speakers,
right.
and I want to be able to be there for them. So I'll do large stuff, but there isn't anything too small that I won't try to be able to make work because I think the message is more important than, anything else.
Where in Indiana are you doing your retreat at?
Kokomo,
Oh, wow.
Indiana.
Wow. I have an uncle
Yeah.
who lives there. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'll make sure
Very
and let them
familiar.
know
I
that. But
will.
but that the podcast is stmichaelsgroup.substack.com. It's also on Spotify. But if you just Google, Currie Myers, or they go to my Catholic speakers page, they can find out a little bit
Mhm.
more about it. But anybody who wants to book me can go through Catholic speakers, and they'll just check and see if I'm available. And I've never said no yes unless I have
Yeah.
a conflict with another date.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate you so much for coming on. Thanks for sharing your story and giving us all of your wisdom and advice. I appreciate it so much.
Bless you. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.